Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We would now like to start the press conference by Mr. Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary-General. Mr. Guterres arrived in Japan on the 5th, and on the 6th, he attended the Peace Memorial Ceremony in Hiroshima. Out of his very busy schedule, a day before his departure, he was kind enough to join us today. There will be simultaneous interpretation. Mr. Guterres will speak for about 10 minutes, and then after that, he will be answering questions. The moderator is Sawai Toshimitsu, Vice President of the Japan National Press Club and of Kyodo News. The interpreters are Yoshimi Nishimura and Naoko Watanabe. Handing it over to you, Mr. Guterres, please.
Thank you very much. Arigato. Good morning, distinguished members of the media. It is a great pleasure to be back in Japan, and I thank the government and the Japanese people for your very warm welcome. Saturday's peace ceremony in Hiroshima was an unforgettable and moving experience. The dedication of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the cause of peace, and the dignity, the resilience, and the courage of the hibakusha are an example and a lesson for all of humanity. I intended to go to Hiroshima for the 75th anniversary of the horrendous explosion. Unfortunately, the COVID did not allow me. I had gone to Nagasaki 1 year before, and I have to tell you that when in the 80s I came to Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a citizen of the world, this has had a profound influence in my political career in my country and later in my action in international affairs. And I'd like to underline that in Hiroshima, I made two concrete asks. First, ask the nuclear-armed countries to commit to no first use of nuclear weapons, and ask nuclear-armed countries never to use or threaten non-nuclear-armed countries with the use of nuclear weapons with full transparency in relation to their arsenals. I hope these asks will be taken seriously because we are witnessing a radicalization in the geopolitical situation that makes the risk of a nuclear war again something we cannot completely forget. And I also want to express my deep condolences, remembering former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, that I met several times and always found a true believer in multilateralism and a staunch partner of the United Nations. I was deeply shocked and saddened by his killing. Mr. Abe leaves a legacy of strengthened relations with the United Nations, and I would once again like to convey our condolences to the government, the people of Japan, and his family on his passing. Japan is a pillar of the multilateral system and the third largest financial contributor to the United Nations. But Japan's support goes far beyond funding. I commend Japan's solidarity and help in response to the war in Ukraine, its strong commitment to universal health coverage, its leadership in disaster risk reduction, and its contributions to United Nations peacekeeping. And Japan's global leadership extends to an increasing advocacy for peace, human security, and disarmament. At a time when geopolitical tensions are rising and the nuclear threat is back in focus, Japan's strong and consistent voice on peace is more important than ever. My talks with Prime Minister Kishida in Hiroshima confirmed this. We covered many aspects of the serious global challenges we face today, including the situation also on the Korean Peninsula. This mission I am undertaking is centered on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. It took place when the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference is taking place in New York. I came to Hiroshima paying tribute to the victims, paying tribute to the hibakusha, paying tribute to the people of Hiroshima. And I will be going to Mongolia and the Republic of Korea. Mongolia, that has been an important interlocutor of the UN in relation to the situation in DPRK, and the Republic of Korea. considering that the denuclearization, full denuclearization, verifiable and irreversible of the Korean Peninsula remains a major objective, together with the success of the JCPOA, to avoid the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And as you know, I have repeatedly advocated for and welcomed the reopening and strengthening of communication channels to reduce tensions, and I hope the parties will resume dialogue and build on earlier agreements. And also would like to express my total solidarity with the issue of abductees, a historical injustice that is completely unacceptable in today's world. Recovery from COVID-19 pandemic is being hampered at the global and national levels by growing inequalities between developed and developing countries, between North and South, and by discrimination against women and minorities of all kinds. I count on Japan's efforts to reduce these unjust inequalities and to support inclusive, resilient, sustainable economies and societies based on the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. I also urge Japan to support efforts at the global level to reform the financial architecture that is failing developing countries. We need solidarity to create a more just and equitable global financial system that works for everyone. And we need solidarity to combat the climate crisis. Japan itself is seeing the consequences of our exploitation of fossil fuels, with an unusual stretch of extreme heat earlier this year, followed by torrential rain. Addiction to fossil fuels is a one-way street to the destruction of jobs, businesses and economies, and to increased conflict, anger and disease. With its impressive records of innovation and deep appreciation for the natural world, Japan has enormous potential for global leadership on climate, and I hope Japan will take a number of specific actions. First, I encourage Japan to take credible and ambitious actions to cut emissions by half in the next 8 years, to become a leader in renewables technology and storage at home and abroad. And second, to build on your government's committee to stop funding coal plants. There is no such thing as clean coal. For real change, I hope Japanese public and private capital will stop financing coal completely, and I count on Japan and all G20 countries to deliver urgently on this promise and push for more. Likewise, G7 countries that Japan will preside next year must make good on their commitment to end new direct public support for international fossil fuel projects. Third, partnerships are essential for many coal-dependent economies to make a just transition to renewable energy. Japan can play an important role in these partnerships in support of the shift to renewables. In doing so, it will open new markets and accelerate economic competitiveness. Japan is today co-leader of the coalition to support Indonesia in accelerating its just transition from fossil fuels to renewables. And I count on Japan to demand that multilateral development banks immediately deliver investment and support to developing countries to expand renewables and build climate resilience through adaptation. As a major shareholder, Japan can use its influence to make these institutions fit for purpose in addressing the climate emergency. Countries have a choice: put innovation to work, carve out new export markets, and revigorate growth and competitiveness, or fall back on climate-wrecking, polluting fossil fuels, risk falling behind economically, and watch others reap the rewards of renewables. I count on Japan to make the right choice for Japan and for the world. I also look forward to hearing Japan's voice on pressing issues of global importance next year when Japan assumes the presidency of G7 and membership of the Security Council. I count on Japan to use its unique position as a bridge builder and peacemaker to strengthen global cooperation and build trust and solidarity. And I now will be very happy to take a few questions from the distinguished representatives of the media present in this room.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Now I would like to open the floor for questions. You can ask your questions in either English or Japanese.
And those of you who would like to ask a question, please state your name and affiliation before you ask the question. Since the time is limited, if you could limit yourself to just one question each and be concise. Those of you who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand if you are in this hall. Now, on a virtual, we will start from the physical question from the floor. Thank you very much. My name is Kaneko from Mainichi Shimbun newspaper. Recently, in the Taiwan Straits, tension seems to be rising. China is having military exercise, and Japan is concerned over this situation. So, Secretary-General, how do you view the escalation in the past few days? And as for United Nations, what kind of role would the United Nations be able to play in this regard, please?
I see things with concern. The United Nations abides by a resolution of the General Assembly with the so-called One China policy. But we all want that resolution to correspond to a peaceful environment in relation to this question. I think it's very important to appeal, first of all, to common sense. This is a sensitive question, needs to be treated with common sense, and then to restrain, allowing for de-escalation that I believe will be extremely important in the days and times to come.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on to the next question. Anyone from the floor? Yes, please go ahead. Matsushima from Kyodo News. The UN, with this Ukraine war, the humanitarian corridor in Mariupol, the UN put a lot of effort into that. And as for grain exports, the UN played a big role. Now, in this Ukraine war, what is the next mission that the UN can do with respect to the war in Ukraine?
Well, naturally, the two things that you have mentioned were UN initiatives that I believe were extremely important to have the evacuation of civilians from Mariupol that had been impossible for months, and allow, since the proposal I made to President Putin and President Zelensky for the opening of the exports of Ukraine grains from the Black Sea, and at the same time with the US and the European Union to work for the facilitation of the exports of Russia food and fertilizers to make sure that we are able to contain the dramatic rise that has undermined in a terrible way the living conditions of developing countries and of poor households worldwide. But of course, there are many other problems in which we are ready to intervene. We have a very strong humanitarian operation in Ukraine, and we are ready to mediate on any practical issue in which we will be able to help solve some of the problems, the pending problems that are created by the conflict. But of course, the most important objective is peace. Peace, naturally, respecting international law and the UN Charter. And the UN is always available to use our good offices in the promotion of a peaceful solution for the Ukraine conflict, as I said, with respect for the UN Charter and with respect to international law.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Now I would like to take a question from the online participants. Let me read up from Mr. Tsuchiya of Kyodo News. Secretary-General Guterres, you have participated in the Peace Memorial, the ceremony, and you have asked the five nuclear powers to observe the peace. And from the government who has been under the nuclear umbrella of the nuclear states, has there been any reaction heard from them?
I don't think there was any reaction, and we are just 2 days ahead of the ceremony. But I believe this is the moment when the risk of a nuclear confrontation is back, something that we have forgotten for decades. This is the moment, as I said, to ask the nuclear-armed countries to commit to the principle of non-first use and to commit to not use and not threaten, as I mentioned, non-nuclear-armed countries with full transparency in relation to their arsenals. And I think that nobody can accept the idea that a new nuclear war could happen. This would be the destruction of the planet. And what is clear is if nobody uses for the first time, then there will be no nuclear war.
Thank you very much. Then we have another question coming from online participant. Affiliation is not mentioned, but this is from Mr. Yukihiko Machida. Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Ukraine is under military attack. The UN as well as IAEA, what are the actions to be taken in your view? That's the question.
Well, we fully support the IAEA in all their efforts in relation to create the conditions of stabilization of the plant. Any attack to a nuclear plant is a suicidal thing, and I hope that those attacks will end. And at the same time, I hope that the IAEA will be able to have access to the plant and to exercise its mandate competencies.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Yes, from this hall. My name is Diga from NHK. Thank you. I would like to ask a question on Ukrainian war. The export of grains from Ukraine has been resumed, and Turkey has been an intermediary. United Nations and Turkey has been important intermediaries. Now, would you be able to link that to ceasefire? What is preventing the ceasefire to be realized? What is the thing that is making difficult to have the ceasefire to be a reality? What can United Nations do in this situation?
We have been working very closely with Turkey, and Turkey has launched a new initiative in relation to the possible start of peace negotiations. The difficult thing in relation to a ceasefire comes from a simple fact. The Ukraine cannot accept a situation in which its territory is taken by another country, and the Russian Federation doesn't seem ready to accept that the areas that Russian forces have taken will not be annexed by the Russian Federation or give way to new independent states. So these two positions at the present moment are not possible to conciliate, and that is why I'm very worried that we might have a prolonged war, and a war that is causing enormous suffering and having a very negative impact in the global economy and in the living conditions, especially of the most vulnerable people.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please. My name is Takeuchi. I'm a journalist. Thank you for the opportunity. International Development Journal is the name of my publication. I have a question about nuclear arms. In Japan, Mr. Kishida attended the NPT review conference, making a great contribution. Now, the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, Japan is outside of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. On this matter, I myself think that nuclear states, Japan bridging between nuclear states and non-nuclear states. I have a question whether Japan can play that bridging role. I believe that Japan should be an observer to this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Have you talked about this with Prime Minister Kishida on this point?
We didn't discuss this point. We had a very short meeting. And obviously, we respect the sovereignty of Japan in relation to Japan's choices. But I think it is fair to say that Japan has had a consistent commitment to disarmament and a consistent intervention in order to keep the disarmament and the non-proliferator agendas on top of the discussions in the international community. Of course, it's up for Japan as a sovereign country to decide whether or not to sign or ratify international treaties. But independently of that, I recognize the very strong commitment of Japan to nuclear disarmament.
Thank you very much. We could accept 2 further questions. So people in the hall, if you have any question, please. From 1990s, I have been with the chairman's office of the NHK, Japanese Public Broadcasting Station. Back in 1986, General MacArthur, together with him, I went to Moscow to observe the conclusion of the INF, intermediate the nuclear the missiles, and Japan has also been supporting this process. From the late 80s up until 2010s, I believe there have been rapprochement between the East and West, but now we are in a reversal situation that has led to the Ukrainian war. And how will the Ukrainian war end? That is the grave issue. But back in 1980s, when USSR has tried to abolish its intermediate-range missiles, and perhaps we need to revive such process. Then for North Korea as well as China, there could be a lot of relevance and impact. So what is the position of United Nations for this issue?
We had, indeed, and I've been repeating it, we had very encouraging steps in the second half of last century in relation to disarmament. The agreements between the United States and the Soviet Union to reduce the number of nuclear heads, that was a very significant agreement, and in relation to the mechanisms of control that were established, the same in relation to intermediate range weapons, and there was this hope that we would progressively move disarmament agenda more and more and come to a moment in which the world could be free of nuclear weapons. Much before the Ukrainian war, this situation reversed. In the beginning of this century, we started to see a toughening of the relations between the biggest powers, and we started to reverse this trend. Some treaties were renovated for a short period, the New START, but we have now a serious negotiation that needs to take place for the next round. Others were not renovated, and we are moving backwards in relation to disarmament. We have now 13,000 nuclear bombs in the world, and we are seeing huge investments in modernizing nuclear arsenals. So this is the moment to say, stop it. That the billions that are being used in this arms race need to be used fighting climate change, fighting poverty, addressing the needs of the international community. So this is the moment in which the voice of all of us is necessary to say that disarmament needs to come back. and together with non-proliferation to guarantee not only that we will not go to a collective suicide, but that we are able to dramatically improve international relations.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. This is going to be the last question, but before that, there is Okada Minoru joining us from online to the Ukraine war. How would the UN respond? But I believe that this question has already been addressed by the Secretary-General, so we will skip this question and move to the next one. This is going to be your last opportunity to ask a question. Anyone? Yes, go ahead. Let me ask one more question. If Russia is to use nuclear weapons, how would the UN respond? What is in your mind in terms of responding to a nuclear weapons used by Russians in Ukraine?
Well, I believe that if nuclear weapons will be used, there is probably no UN able to respond anymore. We might all not be here anymore.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. We have another question.
で、
So one more question. My name is Misaki. I'm a freelance member. Not anything to do with nuclear, but on North Korea, the DPRK, the humanitarian violation. Ever since North Korea has been founded, it is continuing. And in 2014, there was a report issued by United Nations on humanitarian situation, and a crime against the humanitarian has been mentioned. So what has United Nations done vis-à-vis this issue? And violation and infringement of human rights and humanitarian situation. Can you really stop this? What are the specific measures the United Nations could adopt to stop the situation?
In relation to human rights, the different UN human rights body had been very clear in expressing our clear condemnation about human rights violations in the DPRK. In relation to humanitarian aid, the UN was involved in humanitarian aid, especially food and medicine, to the DPRK, where the needs are dramatic. Unfortunately, no visas have been issued to UN staff. International staff has not been able to access the DPRK, and we are having enormous difficulties in having what is badly needed as humanitarian support to the people of the country. And my appeal is for the DPRK to facilitate the work of the United Nations and for donors to be able to support us, because as far as we know, the needs are now absolutely dramatic, both from the point of view of food insecurity and the point of view of health.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Time is up, and therefore we would like to bring this press conference to a close. Thank you very much, Mr. Guterres, for your time. Let us thank the Secretary-General with a big round of applause. As usual, we would like to present a memento to the Secretary-General from the Japan National Press Club.
Oh, that's very much welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Arigato. Oh, yes.
Please write something, a few words.
Yes, of course. Yes. It is not the first time.
No, I know.
I think this is better. Well. Yes. Today is 7?
8.
8. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could you read it, if you don't mind?
Huh?
Could you read this, if you don't mind?
I pay tribute to the Japanese press, symbol of the permanent search for truth in a vibrant democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.